So I'll just begin. It was February 2020 when I first started looking for Terps on Twitter. Like so many of us here, I'm sure I've done in the past. I made a Twitter group, and that summer I started holding weekly Zooms. And the Zooms were really exhilarating. Like we felt like we were in the resistance, and like in many ways we really were. But we scoped really hard, and I'm so glad we did that from the outset. That work really paid off down the line. Um, I'm a broadcast journalist originally, and at the time I was studying for my entrance exam to train as a barrister. I'm now a barrister. I knew that language would be really critical in this, and so we had a really strict language policy from the very, very beginning. Um, for example, we decided that we would never, ever, ever, ever use the word trans woman or her, she for men. The night before we went really over the top of the trenches, if you like, I remember saying to this group, it was like a sort of circle of women. I said, I offer up this work to the women and the children, the babies that came before us, because that's always sort of foremost in my mind, and lots of us in Ireland. Like the way I look at it, the land of Eru is littered with the unclaimed bodies of babies, because this is our lineage as Irish women. This is our recent past. Like the last home closed only in the late 90s. So with the Countess, I've always drawn a direct line from the incarceration of unmarried women and the sale and trafficking of their babies to what is being done today to women and children at the behest of gender ideology. The only difference really is the locus of power has changed, but the culture really hasn't. So when we launched the Countess after all that scoping and zooming into the public sphere, it was the 29th of September 2020, and we did so with our first ever thread on Twitter. At the time, Barbara Kardashian's pulse record was put out, and he was described as a woman, and he was charged and placed in the women's wing of Limerick prison, along with another man who was already there already, called Prisoner X, a man who had been raping his 4-year-old stepson for 2 years, who threatened to pull off his arms and legs if he told anyone. And Barbara Kardashian, of course, infamously had threatened to rape his own mother with a screwdriver because he said that's the way women raped. And he also threatened to pour boiling water inside her vagina. And I will never forget, as long as I live, how frantic we all felt. There was a real sense of fear, like there were sleepless nights, there were tears, because he had been sent to the women's wing. And at the time, Radicaline had already been set up, Women's Space was set up, and soon after us, LGBT Alliance Ireland was set up. But there was an immediate backlash from the establishment. A letter that was co-authored by 40 of the most powerful NGOs in Ireland was put out, and it asked for us to be denied our political and media representation, essentially asking that we be disenfranchised. And it's fair to say the establishment has completely really obeyed that edict on the whole, really, ever since. So, what I want to talk about to you today is how did we still manage to get our message through in that extremely hostile environment within a media blackout? So, I'm just going to go from sort of campaign to campaign. It's not an exhaustive list, but just to have a kind of feel of what worked and what didn't work. So, with regard to that first thing, that letter, that long, long, long letter, demanding that we be denied political and um, media representation. Sometimes their overreach is actually an own goal and it's an opportunity. And that's what I felt about this. It really is a chance to draw attention to the utter madness. So I had this idea of asking women to hold up a piece of paper saying we will be heard, and have it as a hashtag, and hopefully it would go viral, and have enough women, like maybe 20, 30, 40, set up to go, from the beginning, and then hopefully it would spread. And the idea being that if you were very nervous, you just cover your face. If you wanted to come out, it was up to the women in particular, each woman. And it did go viral. It just caught a wave. I can't really explain. There's huge Irish diaspora globally, and sometimes they do activate, and they sort of there's that collective memory, and they'll say, "We can't believe this is happening in Ireland." So that took off, and like just women everywhere were doing this, and it trended in Ireland, the UK, and the US, and it was a nice kind of early confidence builder, I think, for us as a group of activists, because none of us had really done this before. We weren't seasoned activists. We were just kind of feeling our way through this. Um, and I think that did herald the kind of end of no debate in Ireland from that point on, whether they liked it or not. And then after that, we had the cervical check. debacle where HSE, which is like the equivalent of the NHS, had changed their public health literature, and they were basically saying rather than women, they were saying anyone with a cervix. Could anyone with a cervix come for a cervix check? And this, in the context of this, is I think particularly egregious because this is at the same time that the Irish state, the HSE, was allowing young women, young mothers, to die because of their own cover up, because of false negatives been sent to women in Ireland. And because of the lag in time, women were dying and actually dying out, aging out of litigation. And that's an ongoing scandal still happening. But because of the cervical check, we decided to do something for the first time in real life. And it was the height of lockdown. So we were all wearing masks. I think that kind of helped our courage because it was really like exhilarating to meet in person, to do something out in public. And we just did two small actions. Like we just made posters, made big banners. One was outside the headquarters of the HSC. The other one was outside the Dole. And we kind of got in and we got out and we got our photos for our social platforms. And that was the beginning of campaigning for us. But the first big campaign, the kind of, let's say, broke through the monolith and got into some legacy media for us. And I will say that hasn't then opened the floodgates, and now everything we do, kind of gets splashed on the papers. It's not like that. I think they had no choice in this case, and I'm going to explain why. So we discovered we've always had good researchers, but I think you need sometimes people who do everything. And there's different types of activism, isn't there? But you want people maybe who can read boring documents closely, and sometimes you find extraordinary things hidden in them. So this particular occasion, a woman in the Countess spotted in this technical design drawing, that henceforth all toilets all schools that would be built in Ireland and all retrofitting, so all kind of repairs, they would basically get rid of all female toilets and all toilets would become mixed sex. So this became an early lesson in how to get the story out. I immediately realized this was going to really send parents, up in arms, and that they would understand what was at stake. So I put together a press release looking at data that was from England, looking at how girls would retain urine, get UTIs, how they would skip school during their periods. There was lots of great hard data from the UN comparing it to the global south. We put out this press release and kind of held our breath. And we had a good media list by that stage, but no one, we were only getting like tumbleweed up until then. And we kept putting out press releases. This is the first one that kind of took off. And what happened was the local and regional papers started covering it. And then their sort of Facebook groups started like getting really active with local people commenting. And then eventually you could sort of trace it. It made it, it basically got onto the front page of the Irish Times, which is our paper of record. And because of that, I got invited onto RT Radio, to Liveline. And this was again where language became really important because throughout the whole program, I was on it for the whole program. And like I was so naive because I didn't realize if you get phone to go on a show, you're meant to phone up your friends and go, "Can you come and like give me support?" And I didn't phone anyone, so it was just me and like trans activists just coming at me like for like 40 minutes, and I felt like my back was up against the wall. And there was two women really triggered by my use of language, so they kept saying, "You mean a trans girl, don't you?" And I kept saying, missing boys who say they're girls. And she kept saying, "You mean a trans girl?" Meaning, trying to confuse the audience. And I just wouldn't say it. And anyway, she lost her temper and said, "You're a homophobic man hater," and got kicked off the show. The host apologized to me. "I'm so sorry." And it made the evening news. So I think that's like the Streisand effect, really, for that activist. And that was a good year before the National Women's Council protest, which also got a lot of callers onto that show, the Liveline show. And the next thing we did was we commissioned a poll with Red Sea. We just got money together and did it. And that was a kind of powerful push forward because, even though TDs, which are our MPs, were calling us out, absolutely exploiting their parliamentary privilege from the floor of the Dáil, from the floor of our parliament, saying we were just fringe hate group of transphobes. But lo and behold, when we got the results back from this poll, representative poll of the public's views on all of these issues, it turns out our views were completely the majority held views. That it turns out that the vast majority of Irish people don't want their single sex spaces separated on the basis of gender identity. They want them separated on the basis of sex. It led to our first engagement with a politician, and Senator Keoghan reached out and we started working with her. We started writing speeches for her in the Senate, which is our Shannon. These are like commencement orders, orders of business, and it was a really good way to sort of, because then see we have Oireachtas TV, so it's like you're using another platform where you're getting your message out, and then obviously that senator will use those clips. So it was like another way to sort of move the dial. Then we had a campaign that we launched called These Words Belong to Us. And yet again, this was based on someone in the Countess just very myopically, cleverly noticing something. And this woman's name is Barbara Jane, and she works very closely with me. And what she noticed was buried in the work-life balance and miscellaneous provisions bill, which sounds really harmless. Ostensibly, it was like a post-COVID flexi working time kind of bill. But in the bill, in the general schemes, buried in the general schemes, was an amendment to another bill to maternity protection, statutory protection from the 80s. So it's a really aggressive thing to do to like retroactively strip something from a bill that's there since the 80s. But that's what they intended to do, and that's what they would have done, except that we spotted them. So they were going to take out the word woman and replace it with pregnant people. And I have to say, I felt a kind of deep rage. Like sometimes you just feel that deep, embodied rage. And I think it was my own rage and the rage of my ancestors, frankly. And I just remember thinking, well, I have to do something. And I wrote some copy, and I'm just going to read it to you. Woman, mother, female, girl. These are our words. They belong to us. They do not belong to the state. They are our birthright. We've paid a high price for them. Yeah. Some of us, some who came before us, were punished for them. They do not belong to the state. They belong to us. These words belong to us. Anyway, my plan was to kind of gather testimony from women in Ireland and try and make that argument that we had suffered enough, that we'd been through enough, that we had been discriminated against enough. But then the most extraordinary thing happened. Survivors started to come forward, survivors of the mother and baby homes. They started to contact me. Some of them sent me their actual adoption papers of when they were sold from these homes. And, you know, really, when you think about it, they were the lucky ones because these homes were like dying rooms. There was an 80% mortality rate. So the fact that they were coming to us and trusting the Countess to do this work, to tell their story, they've been so let down by the state. The state was in the middle of kind of a, I'd call it a whitewash, really, the commission report. And for me, it started to feel like sacred work, really. And I'll never forget like crying every night, night after night in the edit. And then when I did the voiceover, the studio manager, who was a man, he was in tears and he said, I'm not taking any money from you for that work. Yeah, there are some good ones out there. Okay. But I do think that campaign was like instrumental in alerting the public and changing the narrative, and not in any kind of Machiavellian way, but it did pull at heartstrings and a collective memory and an intergenerational trauma, sadly, in Ireland. But it built outrage, which I think is important. And all the time behind the scenes, which is a bit you don't really see. You see the bit in the shop front, which is like all of the social media platforms and the campaigns. But I'm very early on, Fiona McElhenna from Fair Play, who's now in Sex Matters, is very much a mentor to me with regard to lobbying, with regard to how to become a stakeholder group. You know, I call this the kind of slog work. Like it's a hard slog, but we do every single submission to every single consultation, like every one we do. And it's hard because you have to get like writers and researchers together who are prepared to drop everything and get it over the line because frankly, they don't want you to do them. Like sometimes we get a few days notice, like they're not really advertised. And we've done like EU, IREC, UN, all of the RSE, SPHE ones, equality legislation. And sometimes you get really surprising results from them, like the referendum consultation that we did. The government cited our legal reasoning when they dropped the third amendment that they'd proposed. Now, they don't go, well done, Countess, thanks for that. Like, you don't get the credit, but you know, because you see the same. Like, it's basically a cut and paste. And also, we decided early on to emulate what Fair Play had done, I think early on in your GRA consultation. So we wanted to put the name of the Countess in people's submissions because we've always felt like we're not just here for, or we're not particularly here for the women who can sit down and write a beautiful letter to, the editor of the Times. Like we want ordinary people to take up this cause and to not be intimidated by it. And it can be very esoteric. So we've always tried to break it down into like bullet points, all of these submissions. So, but we do put the Countess in the name so that we know that name will bubble up because we've always wanted to become a stakeholder group so that the next time these decisions are made about women and children, that someone like us will be there with our feet under the table to speak up for women and children. And it is happening. It is starting to work. We're engaging with Sport Ireland. We're engaging with the prison service. As I told you about the referendum, and it's I think to the absolute irritation of government, like they've tried literally every trick to stop people using this lever of power. I mean, I think the whole consultation is just as window dressing. I think it's tokenism. I don't think they want them to kind of do what they're meant to do. It's a kind of a sense of democracy. And like, for example, when hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people wrote in and used our toolkits, they said, "Oh, this is Titian style campaigning," and they're like, "Well, it's just ordinary people spending the time sitting down and writing." And another time they blocked the all email, but like I do think because of the hundreds and hundreds of submissions that have got in, a lot of this has been stalled. The worst legislative objectives, for example, they wanted to completely collapse the gendergram. So at the moment we have full self ID. You fill out a form. Any man can fill out a form. Even a rapist on remand or in prison, and then you'll be sent to a female prison. You're treated as if you are female. But there's a form to fill out. Whereas if you drop the gendergram completely, then on a whim, any man can identify in anywhere. Um, Sport has been a very strong one for us. I think it's fair to say we're the only group in Ireland to do anything with sport. And that's partly because we have maybe a broader base. We do have male members. And also, I just think, I don't know, I'm a kind of a visual person, or I think in terms of, I don't know, like sport is easy for people to grasp and they feel comfortable with it. And it shouldn't be like that, that maybe they should feel more exercised by women in prison or homeless shelters. But it's a good pivot point for people to move into the other issues. We worked really closely with Sport Ireland, but they ultimately came out with a very kind of disappointing policy paper, but we are still engaging with them because we think of this in terms of relationships, even though it can be really frustrating. We just want to keep this relationship going so that in time we can kind of tip them over to where we want them to be. But a nice thing that did happen is that Rima Salim, the rapporteur for violence against women and children, asked our sports team to present to her. So that was an amazing, like, landmark moment for us. With prisons, we did a consultation on the prisons rules, and because of that, I decided to draft an amendment to the GRA. And I know you've had a talk on repeal, and for me, it's not binary because I've always said this: like everyone wants to repeal the GRA. There's no activist that doesn't want to repeal. I just feel, in the meantime, let's get those men out of prison. So that's why I have done it this way. What I've done is essentially to limit the scope of the gender recognition certificate. So that the function of it changes, so it's limited, so it's unlatched from the prison rules. And what that means is you can get your GRC, but it doesn't change if you're male or female when it comes to prison. So they won't be able to send you there anymore. And also it will operate retroactively, which means those men will immediately be removed. That bill has gone through first stage, and we've done a lot of lobbying, and now hopefully it'll get to second stage in the next term. Hate crime has been another piece of legislation we've worked on. We've campaigned a lot at grassroots. We've done a lot of info stalls with people, educating them. Like so much of this, there isn't much in the legacy media. And so if you're only consuming mainstream media, you really won't know, like our side. So that's what we're always trying to do, like educate people about the other impacts. We did rallies outside the Dáil. And I wrote to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice, explaining what I saw was a lack of symmetry. So like only one side of the debate is protected with protected characteristics, status under the bill. And like the feminists in Scotland, they also did the same thing. They asked for explicit recognition for gender critical views and speech, but they didn't get it, and neither have we gotten it. And that bill is in the long grass. I mean, we're told amendments are being tabled. I'd say they're just afraid to do anything with it, but they do sometimes talk about it. Like we now have Roderick Gorman, who's, in my view, a dangerous zealot. He's now the leader of the Green Party, and he's talking about it again. I really hope we have a critical mass that are awake and aware of that bill and how utterly authoritarian and terrifying it is that it will not go through. And another group, Free Speech Ireland, have been very, very good in this space. And like free speech has a wider base, I think, than what we do. Like it's one of the saddest lessons I've learned is that so many people really don't care about women and children, they particularly don't care about women in prison. They're so dehumanized already. So you know, that's why we do to stand up for those women. There's women in homeless shelters in Dublin being beaten up by men who have been sent there. So as I said early on, we scope really hard. We're single issue, and we really live by that quite actively, I have to say. And that means that, whatever your views are on other issues like abortion, like Palestine, like immigration, like we engage with you based on your work on gender. And in that regard, I'd say we call ourselves broad church gender critical. But like what we do is informed by radical feminism, because that's why we recognise first and foremost the need for single sex spaces. Um, but it means that we have had strange bedfellows for sure. Like we do work with conservative politicians. And at the beginning of our kind of, I hate that word journey, but like a few years ago, we'd be like, oh no, we couldn't possibly talk to so and so and so and so. But then when they're the only ones who will actually speak with you, you find yourself kind of doing that. And some of them are very gracious. And I think for me, the challenge is to always ensure that you are not going to abandon your constituency or your integrity, but you are going to work on this one issue that's on the table in front of you. And I think to me that is proto politics, surely. So we have utilised conservative media as well. And I remember actually it was so nice to see Alessandra earlier. I don't know where she is, but she said to me really memorably early on, there you are. Who cares? Just get the message out, put it in the devil's own newsletter as long as you get it out. So I think, like, I feel that if we were only speaking to, women with perfect credentials, there'd always only ever be a handful of us involved in this movement. And that's why we wanted male members. And it's not because in any way to put men forward or say we need them specifically. I just feel like this is not just a women's issue, and I will not have a pigeonhole as a women's issue, because then it's up for women to solve alone, like every other bloody thing in the world. And this is a societal issue, and we all have to solve it together. So I don't want to pigeonhole. But in terms of a referendum, um, a lot of weird things happen in terms of the media around the referendum. Like we would be invited to debates, and then suddenly they'd be cancelled. I did lots of interviews where this footage went missing. There was just so many dirty tricks happening all the time. Like the flagship shows, like to a really surreal and kind of absurd level. Like I would get a phone call from a producer, and they go, "We really want to get you on. It's going to be great." And I'd do like an hour long. That used to be my job, like an hour long briefing call, going through what are the points you're going to make. And then, like 2 days later, you get a call from the editor in chief saying, "We've had a management meeting, and we're not going to have any activists or any campaigners on this show." And you feel like saying, well, then who are you going to have? Like all these people who are uninformed, or you know what I mean? Like, what is the point of having that show then? And this kind of went on and on. But we just utilized our social media, our platforms, and we kept putting out videos, just info videos constantly, like nearly every day. And we've flyered and canvassed in 30 different locations. Um, and about 2 days out, like we kind of felt this is on the turn. We just felt that the message had got out, and the no side people who hadn't understood what the debate was, when they did understand it, they were all coming over to the no. Um, and like we didn't expect a landslide at all. We didn't expect what happened, but it was the greatest ever defeat of a constitutional amendment in the history of the state. So just to finish up, I hope what I said is useful in terms of getting the message out and how to kind of go local, go regional. If you're able to deal with different types of politicians that you can, um, I got on to Tucker Carlson, and like some people were horrified by that, but like I feel like I made it quite a feminist leftist argument. Um, we had a conference, and I'll end by saying this. Like, I just want to thank Women's Declaration International for their integrity and their friendship, because very early on, other women in our movement tried to deplatform me, and they refused that. And that takes integrity, because with our conference, it became very apparent that like what can seem as principles in politics can actually just be what used to be called trashing in the second wave movement. And I think we have to be alert to that. And I would call that really, I would characterize that as feminine toxicity. Like it's social and emotional terrorism that women do to women. And I think it can hold us back. So what I want to say in conclusion is we have to let other women get their message out as they see fit. Because even if you feel maddened or triggered, or you want to appeal, or you want to amend, or you want everyone to do it a different way, or you don't want to do any street stuff, or you only want to do submissions, or you want to do Zooms to a global audience, it doesn't really matter, because we're all moving the dial, and we're all giving our time up, remember, years of our life. We're all giving our leadership, we're giving our brain power, we're giving time away from other things in our lives. So I think it's important we don't get bogged down in fighting or begrudgery or competition, because we can move from a place of scarcity to a place of abundance. Because believe me, we have 8 pillars of concern. There's enough of this stuff to go around for everyone to work in this space. And I think if we can move forward in sisterhood, we can and we will turn this around.